葉がどれだけ手を伸ばそうと届かない場所で僕ら恋をする
Welcome to Japan on Fire, episode 28 on Your Name. And we're still going to conclude the series on Hideo Gosha, but while you wait, we thought we'd do a little unscheduled stop into anime and the 2016 blockbuster Your Name from director Makoto Shinkai. It's my first exposure to the film and its director, and here to help along, because this is a show where we are corporate prostitutes a little bit, because we were sent a screener of Your Name, and to help me not feel alone here in the Podcast on Fire Network recording booth, and I pulled in East Screen, West Screen's Paul Fox, who knows a thing or two about anime as well, and maybe a lot about recent anime. So welcome, buddy, to Japan on Fire for the first time.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's great to speak to you across space and time.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We are. I think we're in the same timeline and not any parallel timeline where I'm 3 years ahead of you or anything like that.
Well, let's hope not.
Exactly. That would be a mind-blowing sort of like, did I smoke too much weed kind of realization.
Yeah, we don't want to be in a bad Dennis Quaid movie, right?
But let's move on to the movie then in terms of our short opinions. And I thankfully went into this without any any preconceived notions, but I had no idea what it was about. I only know that your name, big. And I sort of just kept out of the discussion. I didn't even know what it was about. So thankfully, it was one of those movies that you have zero going in, absolutely zero, and that's a rarity. And what that zero ended up in terms of a short opinion, it's quite accomplished, ranging from the technical presentation that looks very traditional, i.e. hand-drawn, to the fun notion of apparent body switching. It's funny too, but that leads into a very accessible story of attempting to change fates for the better, or if you should, if it's about changing fates for the better for you or for the greater good, if you will. So it has a mixture of complexity and fun, but it's all accessible. That's one point. So that's my short opinion. What do you want to say in short about Your Name?
The animation is gorgeous. Like the director is known for, there's a top-notch attention to detail. He spends a considerable amount of time and effort, often on slow pans or still shots of scenery. And this is something that you'll see again as a style that emerges in a lot of his early work. I still am a bit mystified about the success of this, though, especially on the international scale. Perhaps there's something to it that I'm missing. I mean, I kept wondering, well, was this something that was speaking to a certain generation in Japan, so they were like maybe helping to really push the ticket sales up. But when you think about it in global terms, I mean, it's really good. Is it Miyazaki level good? He's often compared as like the new Miyazaki, which he himself says is an overestimation.
You don't want to carry that on your shoulders.
No, and he decries that when critics say that about him. But I don't know, because story-wise, well, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous piece of animation, and I don't mean to decry it at all. Story-wise, I kind of found it a little been there, done that. I mean, the theme, without spoiling it, I mean, you can find that theme in a very famous Korean movie starring Jun Ji-hyun, which, it will kind of give away.
The mailbox, as I used to call it.
Yeah. That was remade into a very bad movie with Keanu. There's the body swap thing. It's okay, but it's been done too. I mean, you can look to Freaky Friday movies. You can look to anime thing. The gender humor that they throw in there. Like, you'll have seen that if you've been around anime, like with stuff like Ranma 1/2 and things like that. So I'm a bit mystified as to why the story is so popular. I mean, are people just loving it for the animation, for the beauty of it? Maybe, but
it's sort of what I was thinking too, that maybe it was just one of those things that just kept on rolling and no one really knew why, because baked into that review note I gave you, a very accessible story, because I think I need to clarify that it's not hugely new and emotionally impactful for me, but I think it does the job quite well, and then sort of leaves you. I can't say it is lingered necessarily, but I think he ties it all together in a technical package and emotional package that works for the 2 hours. I think, but there is something here. I think I'm too not seeing that that would stick with people and make people just run to a cinema over and over again. So who knows? But let's get into it. I mean, being a new viewer being that I wasn't aware of the plot. There's a fragmented way of telling his stories here present, where you ask yourself very, very much questions here, that people are waking up and they have strange feelings of the dreams, and for some reason the girl touches her boobs while she wakes up, and she doesn't know that they're boobs or anything, or why they're there. So we got out of context hints here, and that's all intentional, of course. Makoto Shinkai is gonna get us there eventually and make us get the context, but they're in a confused state, and while we do get a clear hint that there's a switch here, there's clearly a switch here, I did wonder to myself as well, is this going to be a big body swap comedy? And you went Freaky Friday, I went to, like, is this going to be like Big or vice versa? Right. I was like, Judge Reinhold is back in Japan or something. So that fragmented storytelling, I think, can be a brave choice, because if you're going to confuse your audiences for 10-15 minutes, then you better be a good confuser or something, to earn a confidence to move forward and fill in the gaps during the first half hour or whatever. So did you see that as a problem, or you felt like he probably knows what he's doing by merely hinting at different things, and then after a while we get the whole picture?
No, I think he makes two interesting choices with regard to that. The first is the actual opening, in which you get this music montage, which is very much akin to an anime series opening, where you see these characters kind of encountering each other, and music's playing in the background, and things, kind of what you would expect to be highlights of things to come. It's very much an anime series, serialized kind of montage that he puts out there, which is not something you typically see in a full-length feature film. So I think that was an interesting choice, and perhaps that plays back to the way that he's told stories. So I think with both The Place Promised Earlier in Our Days and 5 centimeters per second, even though those are considered films, they're actually told in parts, right? There's like, they're more episodic rather than full-length things. Here, what I think he does that's very well is, so we get the idea that this is body swap, and body swap's been done before in many genres in many countries, and it's not just unique to the US or to Japan or anywhere else. He does some nice montages. I think it's around the 35-minute mark. It knows the tropes for that, and it nicely sort of just does some quick montages of the characters kind of dealing with that and moving past it to get more into the main story he wants to tell.
Yeah, it never really stops to have exposition dumps, like hitting the pause button on the movie and then telling us what's going on and then resuming. It all seems like part of the natural flow, by dropping hints, being a little bit fragmented, and then by putting fragments into place, we get an idea of and the characters do as well, because the characters are obviously confused in the beginning, and then he's living my life, and I'm living his, and then they're off and running.
I do think that the boobs thing is a bit overdone.
Yeah, it's about 3 or 4 times.
And the thing too that I think is a little bit, I don't know, I don't want to say politically incorrect or anything like that, but it's like, why is it just the fetish on the girl side, right? There's not equal time given to her fascination with the fact that she's kind of got a dongle now between her legs, right?
Yeah, I think the only thing that he observes is that yes, there is one, and that she needs to go to the toilet in a certain manner now, and that's about it. It was a little bit creepy to me, not because they're they're in school, so I guess maybe underage, but whatever. The creepy thing was to me that if you know you were body swapping or touching someone else, that would be essentially a crime. You know, you would be molesting someone, you know. So it was just me thinking like that, don't do that, just play straight.
It's interesting on that aspect, you know, the sort of underage aspect. And perhaps there are listeners out there or one of your co-hosts who have a better insight into live action old Japan cinema, because when I was doing up the notes for this, there is a Japanese movie that is a body swap movie where a guy, a high school student, gets swapped into the body of a girl, high school student. I don't know the name of this movie because I saw it on a compilation of, you know, one of those compilations of like crazy Asian cinema kind of thing way back. I think it was back in the 90s. And basically all they showed from this movie was the guy who swapped into the girl. So it's a female actress now, and she's basically rips open her school uniform top. I think she's standing next to a locker, if memory serves, and she basically does the same thing that we see here, the sort of boob grab, except you see actual boobs in this, right? So if anybody has a memory of that, maybe you can, you know, leave a comment. But that really came to mind again. You know, it's not a new gimmick, it's not a new gag here. It's been done even in Japanese cinema.
Speaking of tradition, I wanted to ask what you think, because I'm not sure about this thing. The movie looks traditional in style in terms of animation. It looks like it's hand drawn, and the only thing that gives away that they're using computers a little bit more is the fact that they use sort of expansive camera moves every now and again. And I don't know how current anime works, if they're going more CG mixed with a little bit more traditional. I remember the Sky Crawlers, which is a while back now, seemed to use traditional cell animation, but also for the aerial battle scenes, it was clearly 3D animation and computers. But do you know if modern movies are being traditionally animated, or they're using computers to give off the impression that it is traditional cell animation? Because if they are, it looks great, and I have a feeling, despite after all is said and done, that Your Name, it just looks too good to be manufactured. It looks like the at least backgrounds anyway are painted, and it's all done in a realistic world too. So clearly it gives off a vibe of that, because it's not sci-fi or anything, or has monsters or anything. That I sort of honed in on the fact that I think this is painted. But do you have any take on that, if they're using computers to actually recreate what Miyazaki did, for instance, back in the day?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's like when you watch a sort of a modern Hollywood action film. You know, if you watch a big Marvel spectacle or a Star Wars or something, you know you're getting a lot of CGI. But with smaller films where, like, say there's a car chase, or, you know, there's something, you know, where they're just using computer graphics to put in extra buildings or put in more traffic or something that's very mundane, and we as an audience don't realize it's there because it seems so very mundane. So you think you're just watching a standard cinematography shot. And I think the same probably can be said here, because this film doesn't focus on, you know, big monsters, big spaceships, that kind of stuff that we would expect to see done with some CGI enhancement. It's very hard to tell what actually is being done with, you know, hand drawing, hand painting versus computer assistance.
Because to me, if I remember watching, you know, the restored Blu-ray editions of Miyazaki films from 88, 89, 90, and some of the stuff in those versus some of the stuff in here, that's just the regular urban stuff, they don't look too far apart, to be honest. I just have a feeling there's a traditional sense here, but maybe not fully. Like, they're not sitting and drawing each and every Cell or anything. But if I can't, or if you can't say either or, then I guess a job well done that they immerse us into all of this, and we can't quite figure out technically what they're up to here. I mean, the only piece of CGI I remember is obviously the whole issue with the comet, but that's about it.
Yeah.
But it does look gorgeous, and I mean, especially the rural town that she lives in, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And her story, of course, while we're getting into the mystery and honing in on it and getting clues dropped, which are, again, they're not stalling the plot. We get this backstory set in this gorgeous but perceived dead-end town. I mean, she's a young girl that doesn't seem to want to live a normal life. One character says, I think one of her male friends says that, well, I want to graduate and lead a normal life. And she is the one that sees Tokyo as the land of opportunities. And she expresses that wish, as the plot said, that I want to escape this dead-end town, so to say. And she got her wish. She's now urban. So without knowing the final tally of the movie, I was sort of making my notes that way, that maybe that's the lesson, that you should honor your surroundings, and they're not as bad as you think because you're young. But, if that is in there, great, but it's not the full focus on the movie. The movie is more about avoiding certain fates. And we don't want to spoil that, of course, but I think he gets us into that while also displaying the gorgeous nature of the town, which I'm sure did indeed enhance people wanted to go to this place, whether it was a firm real place or not, or they just sought out mountain towns in Japan. But who could blame them? Because this looks absolutely like a wonderful place to live in my opinion. So that was a joy for me to absorb those surroundings, while also confirming to myself that he's on track. He's focused on his story as well as displaying all of this. Any notes on that yourself? Surroundings versus how he continues to develop the story. I mean, one doesn't overtake the other, right?
No, I think he gives us some interesting characterizations in especially with the supporting characters and the relationships, but none of that really takes too much focus. And again, a lot of attention to detail on the setting, the surroundings, the colors, just a massive amount of the attention to detail that could probably very easily be missed by people really just looking for the story itself. So it's like, get on with it kind of a thing. Because he tends to take his time with his storytelling. And again, this is a trait that I think you can see in most of his works, at least the ones I've seen. It's almost as much about showing the environment and how it fits in with what's being told. In some ways, kind of like a Chinese painting, in that, it's more about the setting rather than the small figures therein, right? So I think it's a very notable sort of signature of his work, and that may not appeal to some people. Some people want to see, giant monsters eating small people, and that's fine. His work probably may not appeal to every anime fan out there, and I get that.
I thought about that myself because he's telling a realistic story. Yes, it has the changing and the issue of the comment, as I said, but for all intents and purposes, none of this is fantasy. There's no monsters, as we said, and I thought about that, how much I like that in any era, and that tracks back to Miyazaki, of course. And one of my favorite Studio Ghibli movies is My Neighbor Totoro, which is, while it has Totoro, it's still pure realism and almost a snapshot of wonderful daily life in wonderful green lush nature that happens to have a forest spirit, but not a mean forest spirit. And that straightforwardness, a snapshot of real life in animation, which takes therefore a lot to convey, because you gotta animate it, you gotta paint it. I do really, really like that. So there's a little extension, I think, if you're going to compare to Ghibli and Miyazaki. I think you can compare it that way, that he is good at providing these gorgeous looking snapshots of common reality that can be infused with something special, something somewhat supernatural and out of this world, but not betraying the reality. We're not jumping to another dimension or anything. But so I think he can wear that a little bit proudly, that he's doing something ever so slightly in the tradition of Miyazaki, but not being the new Miyazaki or anything. Because again, you don't want that burden. You want to be your own unique voice, of course. There's some comedic touches here. Being a body swap movie, when Taki is in, he's switched. He is, if I'm not remembering incorrectly, I mean, he's trying to speak as a female, but he isn't. Or rather, it's when she is in his body, and she speaks in a more female way. She's using terms or maybe slang or something. The subtitles do a good job of conveying this, but I like those little reactions from Taki's friends. She says something, they go, huh? They're immediately aware of, he's never spoken like this. What's going on here? It's that issue of trying to adjust to be a boy and a girl, and trying to avoid that chaos. And he escalates that chaos quite gently. As neither of them has any idea how to do the boy's life and the girl's life, and then when they understand how they're going to communicate across social media, that groove is achieved. And I think only the latter half is a little bit complex, but not too complex. But for the most part, Paul, as much as he escalates and as much as he develops and as much as parallel timelines and body swapping that we have going on here, it's still quite coherent. He's not overwhelming us with details. There's clarity here, and he gets that clarity across, in my opinion. Or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it works for the most part. There's a logic to the rules that he establishes here, and he kind of sticks to that logic throughout. I mean, that's one of the problems, that when you try and tell a story like this, be it body swap or some other kind of like parallel narratives that are happening,
and dreams in dreams and stuff
like
that.
That at some point you usually think, well, what about this? What about this sort of technical contingency? And he does address that, so he's very smart in dealing with all of that, and that plays out well. I do think, though, that once they get beyond that, they get into what I would say is sort of the sort of last act of it. That's where it really starts to not work so much for me, because you really get into very much tried and true territory of, characters searching for each other and kind of not finding each other, which you've seen in so many romantic, movies and animes and other things over the years, that it almost feels, what would be the word? It just feels like a big downer by comparison to the other stuff.
I mean, it's all about the execution, of course, and I think even though if you were familiar with tropes, if something would be executed at a high level, you wouldn't feel like anything is old hats. I think you're hinting at that he's not clinching it necessarily. He's doing a good job at not clinching.
I was just expecting it to go somewhere a bit fresher, I guess. Is because up to that point, it's like, all right, this has all been very well executed. It's relied on some traditional elements, but it's still a fairly original story that's being told. But then it sort of gets to that last thing that these two characters have to overcome. I'm like, couldn't they have gone in a slightly different direction, so that it's just not so very been there, done that.
For me, it was more about he wasn't achieving 100% emotional impact. It was engaging as a story, and as it settles into being even because there's an emotional and mood switch at one point. They don't know why they wake up crying, right? So and that's not a spoiler. So and after a while, and after that point, the movie settles into being a more of a detective story, and embracing a more calm, serious, and even somber mood. But I was curious enough of that goal too, if because there's like cosmical events here, and if that intervention that one of the characters is trying is even possible, or even something you should do, because it was all like Back to the Future came to my mind here, like a space-time continuum and all of that. On the surface and within it, all acceptable and engaging as storytelling and story progression, but it again, in terms of emotional impact following these characters, that is the point for me that it doesn't get to firmly. It's engaging enough, and it's all fine. But he really wants us to buy into 100% these characters' journey, separate and together, and the issue of the braided cord and what that means for time and all of that. And I tilt my head and I look at it, and in an interesting way, I feel the coherency is there. The coherency doesn't go off the rails necessarily, and the somber mood, I don't mind if we switch from funny to somber. But I'd be lying to say if I was blown away by the build-up and the crescendo to it all. I wasn't, but I was more thinking that maybe a different audience, maybe a younger audience would appreciate this more, but it's still fairly, like, it's not catering to teenagers or children necessarily. It's talking of somewhat complex things. So I think when all is said and done, you come around to the fact that it didn't quite reach my heart, but it's all very competent, and he doesn't go off the rails coherency wise or anything like that. And you come back to that question too, that I'm so fascinated how this blew up, because there is something there that I think goes beyond commercialism. Like, I don't think audiences went there just to see a good looking anime over and over again. There was something there, I think, that spoke to audiences, and a rumor that spread through audiences, and not just in Asia. So who knows? But it gets to a very, very solid level, but it doesn't go beyond that, is my point. That switch to somber and what have you, was that a natural switch from the first half of somewhat fun body swapping stuff?
Yeah, I think it all fits within the narrative he's trying to tell. It doesn't feel out of place. It's and again, as you alluded to, other films that kind of deal with that kind of scenario. I think he deals with it in a fairly interesting manner. The idea too that some story beats are not present and don't get returned to is also an interesting choice. There's, for example, a very important story beat where I think the girl who is now in her body, back in her body again, has to confront her father, who is the mayor of this town. In a traditional anime, we would see in a later scene that confrontation played out, right? Because it goes to that confrontation with her in a very sort of stern face, and then it cuts to something else, right? And then traditionally later on, you would go and replay that, to fill in the blanks. And he chooses not to, which I think is a great choice, because it leaves a bit of mystery as to what exactly happened in that encounter that led to, because that's sort of a pinnacle moment, right? It leads to a significant change.
Yeah, you're right. I actually didn't think about that he filled us in a different manner. He simply chose to ignore one traditional step. So we just knew a few moments later the result of that conversation without hearing the conversation, which was actually quite good and quite brave to, again, like he did in the beginning, like being fragmented. He just simply went from 1 to 3 instead of 1, 2, 3. Which is good. I mean, he's a veteran to some degree still, or by now. So I guess that's the filmmaker kicking in that, yeah, I totally got this. It is mightily dangerous by the latter half of the movie, that by using different timelines and fates and all of that can get so muddled in the wrong director's hands. But I think he gets there, and it isn't simplified either necessarily. And I'm sure attentive viewers can dissect this movie and say what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, but I'm not an attentive viewer. I'm pretty stupid, so time travel movies I can't dissect in terms of that doesn't make sense, why didn't he, blah, 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 blah. So that is something I couldn't spot any obvious flaw in his plan necessarily. So the characters do spell out the theme of the movie and some emotions and exactly what's going on at points, but it isn't too clunky though. It isn't this exposition dump that is unnatural, and in a way also it's all very romantic, and I'm not necessarily talking romantic love or anything, but it's all very done in a very romantic way and supposed to be arousing on that level. The way they work towards the goals of the end and what they want to attempt to change, and it's romanticized, and therefore it doesn't quite reach the hugely poignant level. It's more adventure style, romanticized, and he wants to get to the goal he wants to get to, and I don't know if that was the reason it didn't reach like high levels for me, but there is a sense of this being an adventure, romanticized and sort of simplified to achieve coherency, and that was his game plan, and that reached a lot more people than it might have reached, you and I, but still it's not overly simplified, though. It's not stupidly simplified or anything, because that would be evident if you sort of copped out and just made something super basic. But I think that's the end of my notes, because we're obviously keeping it vague and won't spoil most of the latter half of the movie. Again, in the plot there was no issue of the comment, and I haven't even told you the context of the comment at all, but it plays a crucial part, let's just say, and it's the only CG that I noticed in the movie, but it's a character. It's an important character. So I think I'll conclude my notes there with saying that for new viewers of anime, sure, go into it. Veteran viewers, sure, go into it. Give new anime a chance, because it doesn't look necessarily 2016 through and through. It looks curiously like it could have been partly made in 1989 or 1990, but obviously it has modern tools as well. And is it a good start in terms of his filmography? It's probably the most readily available start, and it certainly has interested me and sparked my interest in the past work, and the past work might be better, who knows. So but we're just simply going to have to keep scratching our heads a little bit, like, why did it blow up so much? Because this is amazing, and the level it blew up to, and I give it that, of course. And I'm sure Shinkai has a lot more to offer after this. I don't think he's gonna drop the mic and exit or anything. I think he has a lot more to offer. So it's a recommendation, even though I didn't think the hype matched the movie quality necessarily. But it's all solid and very good in some areas. So I'll leave it to you, and whatever else you want to share, regardless if it's from beginning, middle, or somewhat end of the movie.
No, again, it's a great animation. Many who are familiar with Asian cinema or Japanese anime or Japanese dramas may look at this and see some of the elements as not very new or inventive, but it's still very, very entertaining. And it's been a massive award winner, and because of sort of the steamroller effect that happened, it's one to see if you're looking to sort of keep up with Japanese popular culture. It's one that's going to be talked about. We were discussing offline elsewhere that, as a director, he's considered one of the most influential, and Voices of a Distant Star was nominated by, I forget, Japanese Fortune magazine or something as like one of the most influential anime of the new millennium. And I think in part it's because it sets sort of the tone and style for the later films of his to come. You can, if you're looking to catch his early stuff, a lot of it is available on Crunchyroll, and or what is their sister app now, VRV or something like that. So you can find, I think, She and Her Cat are there. Place Promised Early in Our Days are there. The later stuff, as far as I know, is not streaming yet. It's just like DVD availability. So you can check that out. And I guess the other bit of news to mention before we sort of wrap this up is that because of the success of all of this, of course, Hollywood has to get their say in, and producer director J.J. Abrams is slated to be working on an American remake to be released by Paramount Pictures and Bad Robot Productions. So
they saw money and wanted their share of it, I guess. And as I usually say, not everything needs to be picked up, and not even everything needs to be remade just because you spot it at the film market and on the market.
I mean, unless they're going to do an actual shot-for-shot Japanese remake, right? Which I don't think Hollywood would do. Just the state of the political mess, with regard to casting and stuff that's going on over here. I just don't think they would do that. I mean, I just can't imagine, like, when you talk about her role as like this, she's like a priestess at a temple, and she has to perform this, this very sort of traditional cultural ceremonial role for the town, that kind of stuff. How would you even go about to replace that? It's so culturally and locally specific to the story.
Yeah.
That why would you even want to take that on? I don't know, just because it's a big moneymaker. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, well, they can transfer things, but then often effect loses, gets lost in that translation, because I'm sure that answer isn't difficult, but it might not be a good answer. The idea of like, how do we transfer it?
Well, it's like The Departed, right? The transfer of the Hong Kong hit Infernal Affairs over to become Irish mobsters, and
which is not a bad idea. Not a bad idea at all. You make it unique, but for me it was still redundant to watch The Departed after Infernal Affairs, because I've seen that movie. It wasn't there fresh enough. Which is another discussion for another time. But because you knew the spoilers, which was sort of like, yeah, there he goes, boom, yep, saw that, remember that. Anyway, as for availability of Your Name, it's going to be out there globally wherever you are in the world, and I'm sure it's already out on disc in multiple places in the world. But focusing on the UK, on November 6th, it received a Blu-ray Steelbook, regular Blu-ray, and DVD edition from Anime Limited. And later this month, November 23rd, sees the release of an exclusive deluxe edition containing collector's packaging, art cards, a 132-page book with concept art, interviews, and the CD soundtrack with the score from Radwimp. So I guess they did maybe some of the score, not just the songs. That will also be included. And I want to thank Fetch Publicity for setting us up with the screener of the film Your Name. So yes, we're corporate prostitutes, but hey, it's something I rarely done throughout the years, Paul. If I'm being honest, like request screeners, give me free stuff. No, it's just why not? Let's show ourselves a little bit more, like rather than work from within our own bubble. And certain movies for the UK market are applicable to our coverage, because it's not like This Week in Sleaze can request any screeners, right? Do you have any Charlie Show movies? No.
And it's a good thing too, because without a release like this, then the likelihood is that as a fan, if you want to get a hold of this, you got to go direct to the source, which is Japan, which means you may or may not get an English subtitled copy, and it's going to cost you an entire house mortgage just to buy it.
Yeah, their prices for even regular DVD or Blu-ray editions are still up there. It's standardized. You can pay $40, $50, $60 for something that's regular, not a special edition, but a regular thing. So they're keeping prices up, and quality is usually good, but you gotta pick and choose. I guess you can't buy randomly, and then to import it is another matter, because who knows if customs catch that thing too. So it's a good thing that we have it out there in the UK, and I'm sure a US release is going to follow in some shape or form, even if not on a big label or anything. I mean, The Children Who Chase Lost Voices, that was from what it said. The banner says something Sentai Selects, but if that's the company or if that's just the banner it's being released under, then I don't know. But it's a 4-disc edition, 2 Blu-rays, 2 DVDs, and extras and commentary, and for a reasonable price. So if you wait for releases in the West, then you can get the same editions only with English subtitled extras and all of that for a more reasonable price. So point is, Your Name is going to be out there. It's coming out in the UK, and that's it. So anyway, we are done for this episode of Japan on 5. Thank you very, very much, Paul. And I've been Kenny B, and with me was Paul Fox from the East Screen West Screen podcast talking Japanese cinema. So sign us out, buddy.
Bye-bye.
Looking everywhere.